Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Rabbi Adam Kligfeld's weekly Rashi study class.
Chapter 2 of Shemot, verse 6. I believe last week we finished reading it and did all the Rashis, but I feel like we did the last Rashi very quickly. And I think I remember the class ending before we had kind of resolved all the comments or questions. So let's start with that. And then if we don't need to linger, we won't linger. So I'll just get us started. Chapter 2, verse 6, Vatiftach, and she opened, she, assumedly, the Bat Paro, although there was a question from previous verses to whether it's she or her Amma, her handmaiden. Is it her handmaiden or her hand who's reaching out to the teva, to the ark in which the baby is? Vatirehu, she saw it or saw him, et hayeled, the boy, and we parsed that many different ways, which is quite interesting. The extent to which we wanted to give any meaning to the double direct object, the one built into the verb and the one that stands by itself. V'hinei na'ar, and behold, it was a na'ar, it was a lad, and we talked about, and Rashi talked about the interesting notion that this is not the description of a baby, but a na'ar is used to describe, Yosef when he's going to play with his brothers. Hine na'ar boche. It was a lad crying, and we'll look at the Rashi one more time again to describe what does it mean to say that it was a lad's cry. V'tachmol alav, she had mercy upon him. Vatomer, and she said, Mialdei ha'ivrim zeh. This is from the Hebrew children. Okay? So we spent a long time on the verse, I think even the previous week. And the last Rashi that we read was Rashi on V'hinei na'ar boche. And Rashi says two words, which is, but saying a lot in two words, right? Kolo kana'ar. His voice was like a lad's, meaning don't read it, that the text made a mistake, God forbid. Don't read it to believe that na'ar means both lad and baby. Na'ar does mean lad. Read it to mean that this was a 3-month-old child who actually was just full term, if we buy the previous midrash. But he let out a geshrai that was the full-throated geshrai of a na'ar to suggest that either he had kind of like a will to live and be heard, or once again, as we saw from a previous Rashi, that God was in this place and I did not know it, to borrow a Genesisian phrase, right? That God is controlling the action here, and somehow God produced or strung out from this little baby the type of cry that would catch the attention of someone who otherwise might not have paid so much attention. So that's how we ended things, but we did it at like 9:29 last week, and I wanted to make sure that before we went to the next verse, if there were comments or questions on the Rashi or things that you want to now say differently about the verse based on that Rashi, I wanted to open it up. So let's see if there are comments or questions. Rick, you're unmuted. Does that mean you want to say something?
Yes, please. I can't raise my hand. The chat thing on the side, it's that not open or something? I don't know.
That should be. Is it not?
I can talk to you. I can chat to you, but the raise hand bar isn't there for some reason.
Someone just did it, so it's possible.
Maybe it's not. Maybe it's mine. I don't know. Anyway, because Larry asked me to look at the Haftorah this week, Jeremiah is also calling himself a na'ar when God is asking him to start his profession, speaking, prophesizing. He says, I can't do that. I'm just a na'ar. So it's this week, so I just thought I'd throw that in.
Thank you, Rick. Marshall. Got to unmute Marshall. Nice mug, Rick.
Got it. Sorry. I don't know if we mentioned it last week, but Robert Alter mentioned that it might also be relevant that na'ar occurs elsewhere as a term of parental tenderness, referring to a vulnerable child.
Mm.
So surely this baby in the the wicker basket is vulnerable.
Yeah, right. It's if you go that way, it's possible to evade Rashi and say it's not that his voice was na'ar, but the scene. The scene evoked the response that of tenderness that na'ar describes, right? But either way, the word is worth mentioning because in a precise text such as the Torah, when there were kind of more obvious word choices, this one deserves attention. I'll remind you the way Everett Fox had translated it. I think we did it last week. She opened it and saw him, comma, the child. That's the double direct object. Here, comma, a boy weeping, exclamation point. So he kind of cheats a little bit and turns na'ar into boy, which is anodyne, right? Like he doesn't. Everett Fox would actually take this stance against Rashi and others, saying, no, this is not an interesting use of the word na'ar. It's just a way of saying a male child, right? She pitied him. Interesting translation of fatachmol, because pity is different than mercy, right? And she said, one of the Hebrews' child is this. So he makes some interesting choices in that translation. Every translation, every verse translation is an adventure. Okay. Any last things on this verse before we move forward? All right, then let's move forward. Alan, do you want to read verse 7 for us?
Okay. Vatomer achoto el bat paro ha'elech vekarati lach isha meneket min ha'ivriot v'tenek lach et ha'yaled. And the sister of and his sister, Moses' sister, said to the daughter of Pharaoh, this ha'elech. Did we do this? This was the question. Shall I go and we'll call for you a woman to suckle, a woman from a Hebrew woman to suckle the boy, v'tanech lach et hayeled, and just bring for you the boy to suckle.
Yes, now that you translated, I realized that we went back one more verse than I intended, because we actually did do this verse last week. So I'm not going to apologize to you for over-studying a verse of Torah, because chazara, repeating what you learned, is a good thing in our tradition, but it's not what I intended. So correct. This was actually the verse that we rushed through, not the previous verse. So now we're going to get to it a bit slower.
Yeah, it was that notion of, you mentioned something about it was hayaled instead of hayeled. And I didn't understand grammatically why that was. So maybe we can just repeat that again for me, please, if possible.
Sure. So yeled is in the family of nouns called the segolate nouns, where there are two syllables. Each vowel is a segol. And when those words appear in a pausal part of a verse, either a sof pasuk, end of the verse, or an etnachta, the comma, and you know this instinctively from some words, many of us do, the first segol turns into a kamatz. Hamotzi lecha minha.
Aretz.
Borei priha.
Gafen.
Right. Some people are very, very precise and say borei priha gefen, because they believe that the move from a segolate noun to an a'eh is only for biblical verse, not for liturgy, and that it's like it's too highbrow to apply that form to a rabbinically written blessing as opposed to a biblical verse. But it's in every biblical verse. And since the word is yeled and it's in the pausal place of a sof pasuk, it becomes yaled. Right? Correct. And we talked about the word ha, or the letter ha in front of ha'elech. When ha, it comes from a verb as opposed to a noun. It's not the definite article the. It creates an interrogative. Okay. So we actually did spend some time in this verse, and the Rashi that we rushed through was not the Rashi that I just read us from Na'ar Bocheh, but this Rashi. So let's read this Rashi again, and now if there are comments and thoughts on that Rashi, we'll linger on that a little bit. So, Alan, please read this Rashi on Min HaIvriyot, that the question that Rashi is answering is how it came to be, and one of you asked this question in different form last week, how it came to be that the initial request, it seems to be, from Miriam to the daughter of Pharaoh is, hey, I'll get you a Hebrew midwife, particularly when we think about, I think it was a comment that Rick made last week, when we imagine how quickly this whole scene is unfolding. Rashi's answer is going to slow down the scene a little bit. So go ahead, read the Rashi.
Okay. Min ha'ivriot shahachzi rato al mitzviyot harbe linok velo yanak lefisha ya ati l'daber im hashchina. Min ha'ivriot, from the Hebrews, that they brought the boy to many Egyptian women, but he did not suckle because in the future he was going to be speaking with the Shekhinah.
Right. So we talked about how this was in some ways an unpleasant midrash to read through, because it's explaining that the reason why Miriam ends up offering a Hebrew midwife, and let's call it what it is, a Hebrew breast, a Hebrew milk to Moshe, is not the initial offer. First, shehechazirato, right, that shehechazira oto, that she brought him. And I assume that Rashi means that the she here is the daughter of Pharaoh, that the daughter of Pharaoh had taken Moshe and brought him around to all these Egyptian midwives. He refused to suckle, right? And the reason why he refused to suckle is because this baby somehow knew, or God again was orchestrating the scene, that one day that mouth was going to have to be tahor so as to speak to the Shekhinah, to the Holy One, and therefore couldn't sully itself by speaking or by suckling from a treif breast, right?
Yeah, but from a pshat level, just on a timeline, I mean, she finds she had the opportunity to go around to all these different people, and then you call it. It's not the pshat. It has to be drash given the timing of what took place.
Or in the interim, she was supplementing with formula. Right? Before I call on Larry and Diane, if your eyes are good enough, Alan, can you read footnote 48? Because it adds what Rashi says on the Talmudic text from which this Rashi comment on the Torah is drawn.
Okay. Hang on. I've got the big book here, but I've got to find where 48 is. It's
on page Tet Zion.
Okay.
Right underneath the Rashi paragraph, there's a little footnote 48.
I got 39. Hang on. Rashi.
What page are you on?
Hang on. No, I got it here. 48. I see where it's 48. I just have to find where 48.
It's just beneath.
Im Hashchina. Hang on. 48. Here we go. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu Peshati L'Rebim Hashchina Yanak Davar Tameh.
With a question mark, exclamation point implied there. So this is a quote from the Talmud. And what did the Talmud say?
From Gemara, Shem,
translate that. Well, hold on. Translate that.
And the Gemara states, and there's
Wait, no, just go.
Ferashi.
Wait. Go, Alan, go back and translate what you just read. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu.
Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God said, that a mouth that in the future will speak with the Shekhinah will suckle from something from tamei, impure or not for lack of a better translation, from an impure thing.
Right. So the Talmud basically says in God's voice, what are you, crazy? We're going to let this mouth be nursed and nourished by an Egyptian woman? No way. And on that Talmudic line, remember that Rashi does a linear commentary not only on the entire Bible, but also on the entire Talmud. He was not a nachschlepper. He got a lot done in his life. And that Rashi Teva is correct. Uperesh Rashi. And Rashi explained there. Go ahead.
Uperesh Rashi. Davar tameh zo shachilata dvarim tameim bahatinok to'em b'chalev kol min shetach tochel.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Kol ma shetochel. Slicha. Davar, an impure thing. This, that, she'achilata, achilata, that it is fed, dvarim, or that dvarim te'im, impure things, and the tinok and the baby, to'im, tastes, its milk, on all, I'm missing something here, called ma shetochel, on all that he eats.
Right. It got very close, right? So Zosh Achilata, this woman, Achilata, who's eating, it's the gerund, who's Achila, who's eating, is filled with Varim Tmeim.
Oh, I get it. So that it is like, this is a woman who eats treif, and how can she be the one to be able to suckle someone who's going to be speaking with the Tzechina?
Because the Tinok, the baby, To'em, tastes, Bechelba, in her milk, Kol Ma Shetochel, everything that she ate. Rashi on the Talmud is a bit softer than Rashi in the Tanakh here. Rashi on the Talmud is saying the problem is not like a racial ethnic problem. It's a food problem. It's a foodstuff problem. The Egyptian woman, and put aside the anachronism of about kosher and treif in a world where this hasn't been revealed yet, right? Because ein mukdam u'muchar b'Torah. The problem is that the Egyptian woman is going to eat shellfish and cheeseburgers, and some of that is going to come from the milk that she offers, which means that this baby is going to eat treif without having tried to, and that it's not appropriate for someone who's going to speak the Shekhinah. The way it reads in our text is something a little bleaker, right? That it's as if it's conceptually untoward, that a baby would get nourished and suckled by someone who's not from the Israelite people, and that's an even harder one for us to kind of like rah Rashi on. But that's how Rashi reads the interlude that explains why Miriam would have the chutzpah to say, "Hey, I have a solution for you." A solution to what problem? The problem is that the baby won't nurse. Okay. Diane, Larry, and then Elon.
Okay, so this is me. First of all, I agree completely with what Ellen said. It's very problematic that the question will be raised as it's being raised, given the timeline. There's no need for this question whatsoever, because the alternative explanation that the sister would say, should I get a Hebrew wet nurse, either because it was in her interest to do so, which we believe and know, or because this wet nurse would want to nurse this child that the Pharaoh's daughter already identified as being a Hebrew, or as I read somewhere and I can't remember, there was some tradition. Maybe Tova mentioned it last time. Some tradition of the Hebrew women wet nurses, but leave that aside for a moment. So the fact that that Rashi had to, and Chizkuni as well, had to comment on this makes it even more impressive and disconcerting that they came up with this very racist view. However, I think Chizkuni has it better than Rashi, because Chizkuni inverts this. So rather than say that Moses' sister is being the racist for not wanting to have Moses suckle on the breast of an impure woman, Chizkuni says that the reason was that the Egyptian wet nurses themselves were racist, and they would refuse to nurse Hebrew children. That at least puts the onus on the Egyptians for having this bias or bigotry, which maybe makes more sense, as opposed to saying our side, Hebrews, whatever, wouldn't dare touch that Gentile trait.
So wait, I got to jump in here because you have to remember that the Egyptians think that the Hebrew male children should be thrown into the water. So all the more reason that they won't want to necessarily nurse a Hebrew baby.
Right. That'd be the fourth reason why we wouldn't even need this discussion. Absolutely unnecessary. It's like going out of your way to prove that you're being, I'm going to say it, going out of your way to prove that you're a racist. Better just to keep your mouth shut. The fourth reason why we wouldn't even need.
Sorry, for a second, the Facebook Live started to be the volume on, and you were hearing yourself twice. Keep going, that last sentence.
It would be like someone going out of their way to prove that they're being a racist. Better to keep your mouth shut. Better not to make a comment on this than to have made it. I know I'm being very judgmental, but you know me. I'm calling it like I see it.
Yeah. No, I want to say a bunch of responses to that because you said a lot of really great stuff, and then we'll hear Elon's comment. First of all, you're right. Sometimes Rashi complicates things for no reason, and sometimes the result of his complicating things for no reason is a beautiful nugget, right? And sometimes when he complicates things for no reasons, it's a non-beautiful nugget. So I'm with you on that. And I had not read Chizkuni, and I do think that his comment is both easier to digest and makes more sense in the pshat of the story, particularly as it amplifies the uniqueness of Bat Paro, who was willing to have mercy on a Hebrew child when everyone else in her culture would not have come near it, right? Like Chizkuni somehow, by explaining how the Egyptians would not have agreed to nurse, I mean, forget about, as Diane said, not nurse, they would have wanted to kill the baby. It amplifies what Bat Paro was willing to do. So that part is a wonderful addition. I know that you know that the way you were using some of the modern 21st century language is obviously it's just hard to graph onto 11th century, let alone 2nd or 3rd century. And also a reminder, I'm saying this out loud because I have to remind myself of this kind of all the time as I live in my world, but informed by their world. Like my value system, our value system is informed by a chain of transmission through eras that were wildly different than ours. And their relationship with, and I'm going to use this term intentionally, but it's not my voice, the Goyim, is just so very different than ours. And the Goyim were treif. And the Goyim wanted to kill them. And the Goyim were not to be approached. Masechet Avodah Zarah in the Talmud is like 60 pages of couched in legalese, is 60 pages of the rabbi saying, stay away, because they infect and it's no good. So in the coming out of the mouth of the rabbis of the Talmud, or the mouth of Rashi, Rashi living through crusades, the rabbis living in exile in Babylonia or under kind of Roman rule in Jerusalem, and writing only for their own consumption. The idea of saying that we wouldn't want the baby Moshe to be, swallowing any diluted treif from a non-Jewish woman's breast would not smack to them as racist, right? Obviously, would smack to them as normative, and differently than someone might say, hey, an 1830 white plantation owner didn't think of himself as racist either, right? I think it's in a very different way we could say that about their relationship with the non-Jews, and still, I'm also troubled by it, right? But I wanted to like contextualize your contextualization a little bit. Elon, and then Rick, and then Steve.
Yeah, you covered basically everything I was going to say, although I would say one thing, which is, in fact, it was racist, but who cares? Meaning that they were getting the crap beat out of them by the non-Jews, So was it racist? Yeah. Did they think the non-Jewish people were bad people? Yeah. In the context of that time, was that a terrible thing? I wouldn't say it was. I mean, if I was living in 11th century France or in early 20th century Russia or in late 15th century Spain, and I didn't feel particularly positive towards the non-Jewish community, I don't think I would be a bad guy.
Yeah. Yeah. We've mentioned a version of this before, that their revolt, their resistance was literary. Right, the Jews' resistance to what they were living through was to make fun of Esau, was to use word games to make to make fun of Goliath's mother, and to suggest that Moshe would not deign to suckle from an Egyptian breast, because that's kind of all they had. They did have the power of the word. The autobiography by Rabbi David Weiss Halivni, who is now sadly at the very end of his life, but throughout his life has been really the world's leading Talmud scholar. And I've spoken about him here and there before. He used to teach at JTS, and then I studied with him at Columbia. He was an absolute Ilui genius. He was ordained as a rabbi in Poland back when being ordained didn't mean like 5 years of postgraduate study after your BA, but it meant studying for the exams. He was ordained as a rabbi at age like 11 or 12 and was a child rabbi in Auschwitz with his best friend, Elie Wiesel. And his autobiography, which I commend to all of you to read, is called The Book and the Sword. And the relationship in the Jewish psyche between the book and the sword, including how sometimes the book is the sword, right? So here we have an example of the book being the sharpest thing they have to do social critique and to push against what they're living through. So I fully accept what you said, Elon. Rick, Steve, Sue, Mazel Tov, Sue, and Barry. Go ahead, Rick.
Hi. I just kind of wanted to clarify, and I see Barbara's comment in the chat. If I'm just a simple guy, I don't know this stuff, so my apologies to all the women in the class. But if you haven't given birth lately, isn't it tough to suckle a kid? So if it was just Miriam and the Pharaoh's daughter who hadn't had a kid lately, that to me would be the perfect situation to bring the actual mother who was suckling them up to that point. So it's like to me, it wasn't going to all the Egyptian wet nurses. It was just a deal between this Pharaoh's daughter who wanted to keep it secret, not to go against her father's rule, and the happenstance of Miriam being there. But I mean, it's not happenstance, but.
Yeah, correct. You're saying a version of what Larry was saying, which is that there's an elegant resolution to some of the issues in this verse, just on a pshat level. Right? You don't need Rashi's image of going around to the Egyptians. It's someone needed to nurse this baby. It wouldn't have made sense to bring it to an Egyptian midwife. I've got a solution for you. One of the times that you were talking, Rick, your head turned to the side for a second, and we saw those beautiful curls in the back of your hair. Like, I mean, as someone who's been resisting going to a barber, I'm with you in the trenches, but you only see it from the side. So
no haircut since March.
Looking good. Makes you even more disc jockey-ish. Steve, Susan, Barry, Stevie.
Yeah, last week we talked about the Shekinah, the divine presence, and when we talk about this story now, it's like, when we talk about the minutiae, but it's like, the hand of God is in this story, and everything that happens now it feels to me like he's maneuvering everything to go where he wants it to go. So, of course she's going to be, unbeknownst to her, whether she wants to or not, a Jewish woman is going to nurse this child, because that's what God wants, because he wants this child raised in a Jewish home to a certain point, so that he can identify. So everything leads to the end of the story. So, whether or not, whether there's the racism or all this stuff, which all makes sense. I mean, it's all perfectly valid. There's logic to it that is not going to seem correct because God's pushing it in this direction.
Yeah. Have any of you ever been in a meeting where the presenter, rather than using a I can't think of it. Rather than using a standard way of doing a slideshow, uses a Prezi, right? A Prezi is interesting. It's just another way of doing I can't think of the word. Microsoft, whatever.
PowerPoint.
Yes. So instead of doing a PowerPoint, which are just slides, a Prezi is slightly more dynamic, where you're looking at a certain slide and then it pulls out and you see how that slide fits into like a whole network of things. It's actually just a really interesting way of doing something. And you're right that, but when the way we're studying text, which is one of the ways that Jews study text, is to zoom in on the letter and the word and the comma, right? And what Midrash does is pull out occasionally, say, just remember, reader, that this is all happening under the supervision and, the word used, manipulation of the Holy One. And it wouldn't be happening if the Holy One did not want it to happen that way. Correct. And then that impacts our sense of the will and perhaps then the morality of the other characters who are present. And remember this mini conversation when we get to the terrible and terribly important moral conversation we're going to have once we get to Pharaoh's punishment in the plagues, right? We're going to be dealing with that for 10 plagues in a row, and we're going to be dealing with it slow, so it's going to hurt, right? This punishment of a human being whose sin seemed to have been directed by the Holy One, right? The hardening of the heart and then the punishment for the hardening of the heart. So sometimes zooming out to see that God is in control helps us understand a scene, and sometimes zooming out and seeing God is in control would make us wish that we were just actually watching human beings and interact of their own accord. I want to, before I call on Sue, I want to go back to one comment that Norm made before on the side. Can it be a treif breast? I thought all human milk is kosher and parv. Halachically, right, human milk is parv. I've never actually thought about the question whether or not all human milk is kosher. I suppose it should be. I don't know why it wouldn't be, but I've never actually thought of the question. And remember that, as I mentioned before, that these kinds of halachic anachronisms or partial anachronisms, the rabbis had no problem with. They had no problem suggesting that there might have been a concern that that a baby Moshe wouldn't keep kosher, but it doesn't have to necessarily respond to all of the kashrut laws of the Shulchan Aruch in terms of the status of milk. So the rabbis partially borrow from the later legal tradition and throw that onto our characters just to give it some color. Sue, Simon Tov, and Mazel Tov, and then Barry, and then Stevie.
Hi.
Hi.
And Mazel Tov to Rabbi Kligfeld, who officiated at a pandemic wedding, and it was, it had its challenges, but it was all quite lovely. So thank you. I had no idea that human breast milk was parv. That's kind of interesting. To harken back to what Elon said earlier, I don't know, we've sort of gone past it now, but I was just thinking about how, look, there's plenty of people today who don't buy German products, who on purpose would not go or who attempt just in their own, kind of personal way. They're not going to go drive a BMW or.
Oh, you somehow muted yourself mid-sentence, Sue. There you go. Last thing we heard you say was BMW.
Yeah, people don't get there are people today who kind of try not to, you wouldn't be able to because plenty of the things that we use every day are German made. But, in an effort to, I know lots of people who would not, purposefully try not to go buy German stuff or something like that. It reminded me that, you get your butt kicked by a certain kind of people. And in fact, you may do things differently.
Yeah. So what was the first thing you said when you started speaking? You said something that I wanted to comment on, but I forgot.
Parv, that human breast milk is parv? How unusual?
Oh, yes. So to give you just a window into the rabbinic mind, do you know why human breast milk is parv?
No.
It's parv because it has to be. Because babies sometimes nurse past when they're eating real food. And it just made no sense to either say
you're fleshed up.
Right, that a human toddler couldn't eat meat, or that a human toddler couldn't, that there would be any moment that a human toddler shouldn't be able to feed from its mother, or to say that a human toddler is eating treif. So it's parv because there's no other way to make the situation happen. So I wish I could have been there when the rabbis were thinking about this for the first time and like, wait, I got a solution. We'll call it parv. Well done. Good idea. Good solution. Because that's the only way to handle it, really. Barry.
So rather than focus on the prophecy of Pharaoh's daughter, I prefer to focus on the prophecy of Miriam, whose strength brought her parents together to give birth to, conceive and give birth to Moshe, and watching him and knowing that this is something very special, and watching him there and ensuring by her statements that it would be Moshe's mom who would be the one nursing him and raising him. So I prefer to see her prophecy here than Pharaoh's daughter.
Yeah, great. And then adding to that, the comment that either Diane or Larry put in on the side, that we're not focusing enough perhaps on Miriam's character, her courage, her holy chutzpah to say, right. It's actually almost more interesting to imagine Miriam not as a shlicha from God forced into doing this, but saying, I'm gonna resolve this with my own ingenuity, the same way that we did focus on it when she, in the Midrash, spoke to her father about his own cruelty in separating from Yocheved. Stevie.
So I went on a little bit of a Sefaria source text rabbit hole. And the Talmud, in addition to bringing up this, potentially racial aspect, is also based on this verse from Isaiah, which is in a Haftorah from somewhere. I don't remember exactly which Haftorah, but the one with Savlitzav, Pavlikav stuff. But the verse is that, right, who's God going to speak to someone who's, just been weaned, and it's about someone's youth and not complicating things with, not complicating God's message with, their own adult related baggage. And the Talmud is rereading the last quarter of the verse to say, instead of being taken away from the breast being another expression of youth, but being choosy or picky, and that somehow is also a, valuable thing in learning Torah, even though the pshat of Isaiah is possibly the opposite. I don't know what to do with that, but I thought it was interesting and worth bringing up.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I'll add one thing to help you figure out what to do with it. Guess what parsha that's from? Guess what Haftorah that parsha? Shemot. Right. That Haftarah is read, as a dessert to these verses. So as you're mulling over what to do with it, the rabbis were also mulling over what to do with it. So that's a nice connection, Stevie. Thank you for that. Okay. I think we finished the verse that we read last week. We're finally getting to some new material. All right. Sue, in celebration of Sivan and Mel, would you like to read verse Chet, please?
Sure. I'd be happy to. Glasses. Chet. Is Chet 9 or 8?
8.
Okay. Vatomer la bat paro, lechi v'telech ha'alma v'tikra et em hayeled. And she said, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." And the young one went, and she called the mother of the child.
Great. Tell me about your word choice, which I approve, but tell me your thinking about how you translated Alma as the young one.
I didn't. I had an assist. I have a translation assist, and it says maiden, and that seems silly. I used to not have the translation assist, but I've become weak.
The root ayin lamed mem is an interesting root that we haven't spent a whole lot of time. We haven't come up to it, and it's an interesting word, and therefore it's an interesting word choice. And so I'm kind of building up to Rashi here. So alma sometimes means, particularly in prophetic literature, in Navi, a virgin. It's because of the word alma that some messianists and medieval Spaniards believed that verses in Isaiah was predicting the Virgin Mary. Interestingly, there's another use of the word. Are Leonard and Rebecca here? I'm not seeing the whole group, so I don't know if they're here. Are you here?
Yes,
right. So ayin lamed mem also means and this is used a lot in halachic literature, like an omission, a mistake, and in modern Hebrew means to disappear.
Here, ne'elam.
Right, ne'elam. Right. Lo tit alem in the Torah is do not restrain yourself from helping someone. Right. Do not disappear yourself in the presence of an obligatory act. My guess is that ayin lamed mem is an entirely different root than this ayin lamed mem. Even so, it's an interesting choice because Miriam has been referred to so far as achoto, right? Vatomer achoto, vatetatzav achoto. So every time that Miriam has appeared in the scene of Moshe going down the water, she's been referred to not by name, but by his sister. So we could have expected after verse 7 began, Vatomer achoto bat paro, verse 8 had been, Vatomer la bat paro lechi, vatelech achoto, and his sister, because that's the referent, went. So because of that, and because it doesn't say his sister, and because the word choice, alma, is an interesting and it's not the simplest way to refer to a woman of that age. Na'ara, and others, right? So that's the engine for what Rashi is about to say. I see some hands up before we get to the Rashi. So Rebecca Leonard.
Hi. So yes, there are two separate words with the same root letters. The first meaning to hide and conceal, and the second one meaning to be strong, specifically to be mature sexually. So that's where the Elim comes from. But then I saw something else because I always thought that, there was a mistranslation over there that the Christians said that Alma means virgin and not a young woman, and that was just a mistranslation. But it turns out that one of the cognates for Alma in Phoenician actually means virgin.
Interesting. Right. So, and it's the first half of the second definition that Rashi is going to base on, this notion of ayin lamed mem, maturity, but strength and vigor, right? And I suppose the way you connect that is that like sexual maturity, at least having the possibility of having that vigor, whether or not it's actually been acted upon is the question as to whether or not it references virginity. So keep in mind, folks, as we get to the Rashi, that notion of LM, ayin lamed mem, as strength or vigor. Alan, Rick, and then Diane, Larry.
Yeah, the shorish ayin lamed mem would also be for olam, world. So it's interesting to think we're talking about world as being part of sexual maturity, or the world being part of disappearing.
In 30 years of thinking about Hebrew letters actively, I've never thought about that. I've never thought about the shoresh of olam. So in other words, you just take for granted. Like I've never thought of the shoresh of lechem, bread, which is what it means. So Leonard, if you got something, we'd love to hear it.
Okay. It's it means world or eternity. That's olam, that is, but that's only in post-biblical Hebrew.
That would be an interesting exploration, how like which use of ayin lam? Does it say there, Leonard, which of the biblical ayin lamed mems it might be connected to?
Well, hold on one second here. I just looked up Alam and Alma, so hold on a second. I didn't actually look up Olam, so give me 1 second here to turn the page. Olam. Okay.
There's also there's Alim also, which I mean, if we're going to play it with the roots and the extra letters and the missing letters, and it's both with Chesed that she took the baby, but there's also something kind of violent about the whole situation as well.
Oh, like where Alimut, you mean? Like,
yeah,
isn't that an Aleph?
Maybe.
Aleph, Ayin, Iceberg, Greenberg, Goldberg. I think Alimut violence is an Aleph.
Okay.
What do you have, Leonard?
So according to some scholars, these words, the Olam words, that is, literally mean the hidden unknown time.
Wow.
And derive from the base meaning to hide. According to several other scholars, the above words are related to the Akkadian Ulu or Ulanu, meaning a remote time.
Particularly when I think about how Hebrew forges together eternity in space and time. Like olam means world and olam means forever. There is something with no end to it, like that vastness, but therefore unknowable. So that etymological connection makes sense. But thank you for the question, Alan. I don't think I'd ever actively or consciously thought about why olam means olam. Rick, a lot of hands. Rick, Larry, Diane, Barry, Tova, Marshall.
Hi. The Alma here, I want to go back to the one handmaiden that was still left there standing next to the daughter after the other ones got driven away by the angel because they were protesting that she was going to go against Pharaoh's order. So it makes more sense to me. She sends an adult handmaiden to go tell Yocheved, hey, it's okay for you to come to the palace.
Right.
She's not going to believe Miriam if Miriam comes up to Yocheved and say, hey, I saw the Pharaoh's daughter, and you can go to the palace and suckle Moses. It'd be better with a handmaiden, you know?
Great. So you and Larry throughout these verses have been offering very interesting reads about who else may or may not be in the scene as denoted by some of these words. So you're saying the reason why it's not Achoto is that it wasn't Miriam. And Alma gets in. Very interesting. Okay, Larry, Diane.
Internet problem, so I hope we'll be connected. I actually want to take it in a different direction.
Oh, you went in and out, Larry. Can you try again? You got.
Oh, was I frozen?
For about 6 seconds. So we heard you say different direction.
Okay, so I'll credit Chizkuni for what I'm going to say to some extent, but I want to compare the two verses, the previous verse and this verse. So if you look at the previous verse, Vatomer la bat paro, and this verse is Vatomer la. Hold on one second. Forgive me. Vatomer achotav el bat paro is the previous verse. So it first says the achoto, which is the subject of the sentence. So it goes, his sister said to Pharaoh. Pharaoh is that an indirect object? I don't know what the form is, but it's
indirect.
Two-part. Yeah. And in the verse we're looking at, it's V'tomer la, and she said to her, to
Miriam,
to Bat Paro.
No, not to Bat. Bat Paro is the subject of Vatomer.
Vatomer la is the sister. So what's happening here is the subject and indirect object are inverted. Because in the first case, it's the sister said to Pharaoh's daughter. And this one is Pharaoh's daughter said to the sister.
Yes.
But the order is kept as the sister first and Bat Paro second.
Okay.
You see that?
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't say that she said to the sister. It says she said to her. And then she says Alma. And why would that be? Because Pharaoh's daughter doesn't know that she's the sister. So we have to use la as opposed to achoto, and we have to use ha'alma instead of achoto because it's hidden from Pharaoh's sister that this is Moses' sister. But don't thank me. Thank Chizkuni.
It's hidden. It's ne'elam, you might even say, from her.
It's ne'elam, right.
Great. What a great and kind of a precise read that since the subject of the verb in verse 8 is Bat Paro, all the words in the verse would make sense from her perspective, as it were, and from what she knows and what she doesn't know. To her, she's just an Alma. Great read. Barry, Kathy, I know it's Barry. Tova, Marshall.
So just a bit of the philosophy behind the philology of Olam, Alma. I was just having fun in my mind as I was hearing the discussion that existence bears its own demise. So sexual prowess, the energy, its purpose serves its function, and then it's ultimately its demise. So it's all the same. Existence and disappearance.
Yes, and right. Because existence both followed and is succeeded by disappearance. Tova and Marshall.
This kind of builds on what people have said in between, but also I think it raises a question. I loved Larry's interpretation of the use of young woman to reflect that she does not. Bat Paro does not know this is Moses' sister. The comment originally that I was going to make was at the end of the sentence adds more to the issue because it's young woman went and called the child's mother rather than their mother or something that continues to acknowledge that relationship.
Right.
But if we're interpreting it, and I do like it, that we're seeing this from Bat Paro's perspective, therefore this is the young woman and she doesn't know she's related to the child. How does she know that the nursing woman is the child's mother? So if we follow that through and put that as the thought of Bat Paro, that she's sending this young woman to get the child's mother, that's acknowledging some knowledge on her part that we haven't dealt with yet.
At some point in the verse, what Larry offered and now what I see what Norm offered in the chat, it kind of runs out and the verse comes back to what we know in the story and not only what Bat Paro does. Marshall.
Just going back to Leonard's comment about the word olam, how it's understood post-biblically, I really love the Sidur Lev Shalem, where the ambiguity of the word olam is mentioned in the Kiddush. Baruch atah Adonai, our God, sovereign of time and space.
Great. I had not seen that. Yeah, that is really a wonderful rendition of that word. Sovereign of time and space. Terrific. Stevie, and then we're going to go back to Sue and have her read the Rashi we've basically been anticipating.
Yeah, just that it seems to me that the text needs to at some point tell us that Miriam is too young to nurse a child herself, right? That is not necessarily self-evident without this. Like, this is the verse that happens to shove that information into the reader.
Mm-hmm. Otherwise, she would have just offered herself, you're saying.
Or you at least ask the question why she didn't.
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
But here she's specifically referred to as Alma, who therefore couldn't.
Good. Let's do it. Turns out we're going to do exactly what we did last week. We're going to read a Rashi in the last 3 minutes of the class, and then we'll see if we need to go back to it next week. But I promise that next week, if we go back to it, we won't go back yet another verse. Okay, Sue, read the 4-word Rashi, please. You got to unmute again.
I did, yes. V'telecha alma. Halcha bizriot ve'almut ka'elem. Okay. Alma says that she went fast, quickly, and vigorously like a young person.
Good. So zrizut lizarez, there's a Mishnaic notion, zrizim makdimin la mitzvah, those who are eager and vigorous and want to show their joy of doing mitzvot will run to do a mitzvah. It's why you generally put up the first wall of your sukkah right after breaking fast on Yom Kippur. The first moment that you're obligated to build a sukkah, that's the next mitzvah come up, you run to do it. It's why you see, particularly Charedim washing their hands at the kotel and then running to daven, right? Literally zrizim. So halcha, she didn't just go. It's only Rashi saying the noun used to describe her in the scene actually describes the verb, right? Instead of it using a different verb, it's just v'telech, but how did she go? She went with zrizut and almut. And in order for his comment to make sense, he has to think that we know that one of the usages of almut is not just disappearance and not just young, but energetic, ke'elam, like a young person. Now, I have a foot in one of the other books that I have here, the one that I suggested last week. There's an interesting comment that bringing in the Aramaic. Maybe we'll end with this. Let me just find it quickly. Elem, ayin lamed mem, b'lashon Arami, in Aramaic. Hu lashon ometz is the language of the word ometz, which we translate as courage. Someone mentioned before Miriam's chutzpah, like a kind of a chutzpah courage or a courageous chutzpah. Kamo, like the exhortation, rak chazak be'ematz, when Joshua is exhorting the troops, and when you want to give someone like a little exhortation before they do something in kind of Jew speak, you say chazak ve'amatz, go be strong and of courage. That verse in the first chapter of Joshua, chapter 1, verse 7, rak chazak ve'amatz, be strong and of courage, is translated by Onkelos into the Aramaic, shetirgemuhu lechud, only, tikif, strong, like takifu in the adirhu in Pesach, ve'alem. So the Aramaic translation of ematz, be of courage, is alem. So Rashi then reads, or assumedly Rashi reads that back into this verse, that vatelech ha'ama, the Torah chooses to describe what's happening here, not with the verb, but with a noun. She went like an alma, running courageously, taking control of the situation, taking control of the scene as she goes and chases the woman. Rashi does not think it's another woman in the scene, although I like Rick's interpretation of it. And Rashi wants us to be sensitive to this interesting word choice when it could have been something different. So since we did begin a minute or two late and we have a minute or two left, comments or reactions on that Rashi and or this notion of what Elam might have meant in Aramaic? Tova.
It just struck me as you were mentioning that it seems like throughout the Parshiot we've been reading, what we have is over and over again people acting in ways that are in some ways beyond or uncharacteristic or differentiated from their normal selves. We have a Yeled with a voice like a Na'ar. We have a Bat Paro with mercy for the baby. And we have the daughter or the sister who is acting with the vigor of a young man, and it all is people are acting beyond themselves, which goes back to the earlier comment of God's presence in all of this, that somehow everyone is taken beyond themselves into something higher, more powerful, more spiritual.
Yeah, and that's great, Tova, particularly the comparison here of the non-sentient Moshe and the very sentient Miriam, who are each described in nearby verses as being older, more vigorous, greater, producing sounds and actions beyond them. That's a wonder. I had not thought about that either. Great. It was such sensitive and precise looking at the text today, folks. I'm so grateful for your contributions.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.